Okay, so today we're going to be talking about national income accounts and the general topics of the circular flow diagram and gross domestic product,
as well as the real GDP and nominal GDP and how they relate to one another, and how they show economic growth within a region. Okay, the first thing we're going to be talking about is the circular flow diagram in a simpler term. Alright, so the circular flow diagram is a representation of the flows of money and goods and services within an economy. So the flow diagram has four main parts: a household, which is a group or individual that share an income; firms, an organization that produces goods and services for sale; product markets, are households which buy goods that they want from firms; and factor markets, which is where firms buy the resources they need in order to produce goods and services that the households then buy. Alright, so we're going to start off with the households at the top. Okay. We'll finish off and write factor markets, firms, and markets for goods and services.
Now that John spelled everything out for you, I'm going to draw the flow of money and factors and goods and services throughout the diagram. So first, in black, is the flow of money throughout the diagram. So first, factor markets will send money to households by means of wages. Then, from the households, money goes into markets for goods and services because these households are buying goods and services. Then the money from these markets eventually go to the firms because the firms are producing these goods and services, so they're making income by what is being purchased. Finally, the money goes from the firms to the factor markets so they can pay for not only means of production like technology, but wages and salaries. Now in green is the flow of goods and services. So from the firms create goods and services and put it in the markets. Then eventually these goods and services are bought by households, so it goes from markets for goods and services to the households. Then from households is where factors come in. These are goods and services, this is a factor. So what the households give for the factor markets are hours of work, or any kind of work. Then from the factor markets, more factors come into the firms. So these factor markets produce things like technology and these workers, as I spoke of before.
Alright, and now we're going to talk about gross domestic product, also known as GDP. GDP is the total value of all final goods and services produced within an economy. Now, GDP only calculates the final good that is produced and not the intermediate goods that are inputted into the final production. So the three ways to calculate GDP are by first surveying firms. Firms are asked to provide information regarding the final production of their goods and services so that we can add them up together to, again, calculate our GDP. The second way is by solving for aggregate spending, which is consumer spending plus government spending plus investment spending plus exports minus imports. And the last way is by adding total factor income by households and firms.
So what does GDP tell us? It really enables us to measure separate economies on a global scale. It shows us what kind of economic weight each country has. So for example, Japan has the world's second largest economy, but it's only 1/3 of that of the United States. So when we calculate GDP, it really enables us to compare each nation and their production. And there are two ways GDP can grow. It can either grow because an economy actually grows or simply because inflation rises. And this is where we'll talk about nominal and real GDP. And the only real way, or what you need to measure GDP with accuracy, is the aggregate output, which is the total quantity of final goods and services produced within an economy.
Alright, so here we have an example of a very simple economy where only two goods are being produced. So we're going to calculate both real GDP and nominal GDP. So for year one, all you're going to do to calculate nominal GDP is multiply the quantity of apples times the price of apples, which is 2,000 times 25 cents, which is $500, plus the quantity of oranges times the price of oranges, which is 1,000 times 50 cents, which is another $500. That all adds up together to have a GDP of $1,000. So because year one is our base year, there's no prices to be adjusted. There's no inflation to be adjusted for, which is why our real GDP is also just 1,000.
Now that John's spoken about year one, I'm going to talk about year two. Again, we will multiply the quantity of apples times the price of apples, add that to the quantity of oranges times the price of oranges. Eventually, you get $1,500 as your nominal GDP. So it would seem that in year two, you have $500 extra of GDP. Oh, well, it's a way better production of a year, right? Then when you look at real GDP, it's only $150 more than the first year. And the reason this is because to calculate for inflation, you eventually just have to multiply the quantity, which is the aggregate output, times the price in year one. So this is a inflation adjustment. Instead of 30 cents, it's really 25 cents because we have to use the base year. So it would be 2,200 times 25 cents plus 1,200 times 50 cents, and eventually you get 1,150.